For the presenters, we have Don Sueoka, hope I pronounced your name correctly, the Congressional Papers Archivist at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. It's a position she's held since 2020. She's currently chair of the Society of American Archivists Congressional Papers section and a member of SAA's America 250 Task Force. She also currently serves on the board of the Hawaii Council for the Humanities and has previously served on the boards of the Association of Hawaii Archivists. We're also joined by John Caldwell. He's the Political and Public Policy Papers Archivist at the University of Delaware. He's also the media past chair of the Congressional Papers section of SAA. And John has experience with congressional records both on and off Capitol Hill, having worked for Senator Kent Conrad, Democratic leader Harry Reid, as well as the Senate Historical Office before coming to the University of Delaware in 2017. And we have Kate Gregory. She's an assistant professor and director of the Mississippi Political Collections at Mississippi State University Libraries. She began working with congressional collections as an intermittent worker in 2014 before earning her MLIS from the University of Alabama in 2018 and advancing to director in 2022. She has served as a member of the executive committee of the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress since 2024 and chair of the SAA Congressional Paper Section from 2023 to 2024. I really appreciate you all of us joining this morning, all of you joining us this morning.
And I switched my microphone. Is that better, Rob?
Yes, that is. That is. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll be facilitating the Q&A at the end, and hopefully everyone will be able to hear me a little better. So sorry about that, everyone. Um, I will stop sharing my screen now so that John can share his.
All right. Can everyone see my slides? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Um, and all right. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Caldwell, and I'm going to be starting off by giving a little bit of a background on what congressional collections are and how these records kind of come from Capitol Hill and get into the repository setting. So what exactly do we mean when we talk about congressional collections? These are the personal papers of a former member of Congress by custom, tradition, and congressional rules. These papers are the personal property of individual members of Congress. And so they have the sole discretion to retain their collection when they leave office, to destroy these records, or to donate them to an archival repository. And the calling them personal papers they are treated as such, but it's a little bit of a misnomer because they act much more like organizational records. They are not only the work product of the member of Congress themselves, but also their staff as well. So there are multiple creators that are reflected in these collections, and a lot of them center on very discrete areas of work done by the congressional staff. And these collections contain a lot of different things. There are legislative documents, research material, reports, draft bills, memos, office administrative records, so schedules, travel, staff lists, financial material, press records, interviews, press releases, op-eds, newspaper clippings, constituent service records. These could be casework from individuals in the member's district who are reaching out to seek assistance with a federal agency, or maybe just writing to their member of Congress expressing their views on the issues of the day. There can be committee records. All members of Congress serve on multiple committees. Some of them serve in leadership positions on those committees. So sometimes those end up in the collection as well, and in the office. Campaign records, advertisement, opposition research, mailers, the political files, party leadership files, and all of these different records can come in multiple different formats, both physical and digital, multimedia, a lot of electronic records, both in terms of legacy removable media, as well as born digital records, more contemporary born digital records. And for these big collections, why should anyone care? That's a question that we receive not infrequently for those of us who do work with these kinds of collections. And there's a few different answers to that. One of the most common is that they are good at documenting the legislative process and an aspect of government operations. This pulls back the curtain. These collections can pull back the curtain on the legislative process, the work that goes into crafting policy from the people's branch of government, and it's also they can also be used to understand the relationships between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Another oft-cited reason why we keep these collections is for accountability. By preserving this documentation, we can show the efforts to pass or prevent different legislation, as well as different policy results, and view government oversight from a different lens. And so these can really show the successes and the shortcomings of our federal government as they try to do their job for the people of this country. But there are some other good reasons to keep these collections as well. Because of how much constituent material is in here, people writing in, seeking assistance with federal agencies, local interest groups within the different districts making requests of the member. It's a really great way to preserve the diverse voices of the citizenry of the United States and the residency of the United States in their interactions with their elected officials. And then it's also a great source of local history. People are writing into these offices, communicating with these offices about issues that are very close to home in the home district. Looking at the schedules and prepared remarks for different members can show the different social interactions between groups within the district. And so these can really be a goldmine for local history, in addition to some of the larger issues around DC. There's a bit of a complex web of how these records are created and who is involved and may touch these materials from creation until they get to the repository. So I'm going to go through this a little quickly, but just to show you some of the players, there are the members and their staffs. There are 541 elected members between the House and the Senate. Each one of those offices have a staff from tens to dozens, and each of those offices does run as kind of a kingdom unto itself. And this is one of the major players, obviously, in crafting these collections. Then there are also the committees. There are 45 committees, all of which have very specific jurisdictions between the House and the Senate. There's a few joint committees as well. They review legislation, they conduct oversight, investigations into the other branches of government. And the Senate, of course, also has the confirmation process as well. And those materials are also found a lot in the committee records. Committee records are permanent records of the respective chamber. And so they are not exactly the property of the member. They are the property of the House and the Senate, respectively. And it falls onto the clerk of the House and the secretary of the Senate and their offices to oversee the archival and records management functions for the chambers in trying to collect those inactive records and transfer them and preserve them. Helping them do that are the House Office of Art and Archives and the Senate Historical Office. These offices kind of help with that functional aspect of the archives and records management. They are the local subject experts within the two chambers, and they also serve as very vital connections between repositories that have these materials and the Hill. And so the House Archivist, the Senate Archivist, and their teams are incredibly valuable resources for anyone working in this field. There are other Hill offices who may be generating or collecting records related to the members, photo studios, recording studios for interviews. There are offices that help with a lot of printing and mailings, and so all of these different places may have pockets of records that, when a member leaves office, will kind of amalgamate into a member's collection. There is a role for NARA. The Center for Legislative Archives is a division within the National Archives that acts as the steward for the permanent records of the Senate. So committee records go there, and the House and the committee records go there. Um, the Suitland Federal Records Center has also been a place offering courtesy storage to individual members of Congress who do not have the space in their offices in DC to retain physical material. So for legacy collections, for members of long service, there may be a lot of material there at Suitland as well. And then finally, there's a variety of contractors and outside vendors. Some of these are those companies that provide the infrastructure for the constituent data systems that each office uses to manage constituent interactions, or they may be third-party vendors or companies that are assisting in different aspects of congressional work. So how do these collections get to a repository? When a member leaves office, that could be through resignation, retirement, loss of election. There is one courtesy move from DC to a location within the home state. If it fits in a record center carton, it can go on a truck and get delivered to a repository or a location in the home state. Some members may choose to retain their records, while others may begin negotiations with a repository earlier on in their process. So, obviously, deeds of gift are incredibly important here. One of the questions is always, is the member still in office? Are you working with, communicating with the member who is in the process of leaving Capitol Hill, or are you communicating with someone who has already left federal service? And that's going to change the nature of the conversation a little bit in terms of the mechanics of a deed of gift. Who are you negotiating with? This is kind of a follow-on of, is the member still in office? Very frequently, these collections are being these agreements and these collections are being acquired with discussion, not necessarily with the member, but with their staff, their legal counsel. And so when it is with those people, you will be doing a lot of education about archival terminology, archival practice, and how we manage collections of inactive records when they come into our vicinity. And if you're dealing with staff, you also have another layer of nuance in these conversations because staff also have a vested interest in the material because this is their work product as well, even if it is the property of the member themselves. Um, a lot of these collections there will be a balance of restrictions and closure periods. Some of these are set by different privacy laws as well as different ownership laws. For example, if you have copies of committee records in your repository, which is allowed to have copies, you do have to follow the restrictions that are placed on all committee records, which can be 20 to 50 years depending on the chamber and the type of material. You also have, because of the size of these collections, you will also have extended periods for processing. So they will be could be closed for an extended period of time. So there's always a negotiation with local best practice and with the donor themselves in trying to figure out what is the right tact to take in trying to structure this part of the agreement and the transfer. Do you want to touch briefly on resources? Congressional offices can use their office funds to do some archival work within the office if they choose to do so. Obviously, that is only an option if you are working with a member who is still in office at the time that you're figuring out what they may be looking to donate to your repository. It is also possible that if there are unspent campaign funds when a member retires, that those may accompany a collection or other financial donation may accompany the records, though those examples are much more the exception to regular practice than the rule. And just to kind of close out this portion of our presentation today, I just wanted to tackle a couple of the special considerations for the different material you'll find in these collections. And one is committee records. This is a constant point that is discussed within the congressional papers community. By law, committee records belong to the committee in question and therefore the chambers themselves. Then these records go to the Center for Legislative Archives. Members can retain copies of committee records in their collection, but there are those closure periods that I mentioned. And sometimes it can be a challenge trying to decide if an item is a true committee record, a copy of something that just came from a committee because but got funneled into the personal office, like a hearing memo. Um, and so when in doubt, always contact the House and the Senate archivist, and they can you can kind of describe your situation, and they can help you make those determinations in figuring out whether you're working with the committee rules or whether it falls into the camp of a personal office record. Um, Classified records, there's always the potential of discovering these when working with federal information. Um, Generally speaking, this is going to be something to consider in older collections, as in recent decades, both the House and the Senate have changed and how they handle classified information on the Hill. But this is still something that you could run across. There are formal classification markings and formal classification designations, and any classified record will have those. There may be other markings that look like classified material, not for release, embargoed until X date, that may not actually fall within that formal federal classification system and is more of about an aspect of the record when it was in its active life. If you do run across classified information or think you have discovered classified information in a congressional collection, segregate and secure that and reach out to the National Declassification Center at NARA, and they can work with you to determine if this is in fact a classified record and how to properly handle that for a formal review. Campaign records, these are wonderful sources of information within a congressional collection. By law, official congressional funds and campaign funds cannot mix. So staff who are on payroll on Capitol Hill can't really touch any of the campaign records, nor can office funds be used for the transfer of campaign records to a repository. So they can be included within the same collection, they can fall within the same deed of gift, but the mode of arrival for these materials will necessarily have to be different than the rest of the records that may come from a collection. Space is a huge consideration when reviewing whether you're taking this in or when you discover one of these collections. They can be large into the hundreds or thousands of linear feet. Congressional collections at my repository range from 15 to 500 linear feet of physical records. And then obviously there can be terabytes upon terabytes of digital information. So when thinking through the acquisition and management of these collections, is important to have a good understanding of what kind of space limitations you may have. Copyright, in general, materials created by the federal government are not under copyright. That said, there will be a lot of could be and will be a lot of copyrighted material within these collections. A big example could be photography or constituent correspondence. Another thing to think about with deeds of gift, if the donor transfers copyright, there will be a lot of records or can be a lot of records that do not, the donor is not the copyright holder and are not official federal records, products of the federal government. So keep in mind that there can be some copyright issues in these collections. Again, these are large, they can take a while to process, especially if there is not dedicated staff within the repository to work on them. So they can be closed for an extended period of time. If that is the case and these are going to be in the backlog for a while, it's really important to get on top of the accessioning process, especially if there's born digital or fragile media within these collections, so that you can mitigate any sort of information loss. And then finally, there's a lot of ancillary information that is helpful to know about both the operations of Congress and individual offices that may or may not show up obviously within the records. Staff issue portfolios, the different functions, key legislation that the member passed or was working on, committee assignments. There's a lot of these little things that are helpful to know and important to know while working on processing. And there's a lot of wonderful resources too that I want to highlight briefly are congress.gov. This is a website run out of the Library of Congress that tracks a lot of legislation. And there's a lot of historical information about legislation, how far in the process they went. There's also a lot of wonderful indexes and dictionaries and resources on there for understanding how policy is classified different issue areas. And the other one that I want to highlight is the Congressional Bio Guide, Biographical Directory. This is maintained by the House and the Senate Historical Office and the House Office of Art and Archives. And it is a wonderful place to go and look up information about members of Congress, what their committee assignments were, dates of service, did they serve in both chambers, as well as are there other research collections pertaining to the different members that are in repositories across the country. So it's a good clearinghouse to maybe find other repositories that have additional information about the member whose records you're dealing with. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Dawn.
All right, thanks so much, John. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you folks all see the slide that says now what? Okay, I'm guessing you can. So I will go ahead and get started. Aloha, everybody. My name is Dawn Sueoka, and I am, okay, great. I saw the thumbs up. Awesome. Thanks. I am the Congressional Papers Archivist at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I'm going to be taking over at this point, which is the point where you have the collection on site and you're wondering, oh no, what am I going to do with these 1,500 boxes that are sitting in my reading room? This is actually one of the reading rooms in our university library with the Senator Inoue collection in it. So I am going to kind of walk us through the processing stage. And briefly, what I'd like to cover is preparation for processing. We'll briefly talk about some common series that you'll find in congressional collections. And then I want to take some time to share some case studies of collections in our library's congressional collection to kind of illustrate two different approaches to processing congressional collections. And then I'll end with some takeaways. Okay. So before getting into processing, before even doing an inventory, I think there's some prep work that you can do that is going to pay off very significantly in the long run, especially if you're unfamiliar with congressional papers and or if the collection came in with little or no original order. And some of this is going to be familiar from processing other types of collections, and some of it is going to be specific to congressional collections. Okay, so an important first step is to gather and review relevant documents, starting with the deed of gift, which John mentioned in his portion of the presentation. This should tell you when the collection is going to be open for research, which will help determine a processing timeline. It may tell you that some series, like constituent casework, for example, will be closed for longer than the rest of the collection. Conversely, it may say that series like speeches and press releases that were intended for public distribution could be opened sooner than the rest of the collection. So in this way, the deed of gift can kind of help you to set processing priorities at the series level. And then if any funding is received with the collection, the deed of gift may have language outlining how that funding can or cannot be spent. Accession forms can be especially helpful in cases where the collection was accessioned a long time ago and has been sitting there in a backlog for a while. These can function as a preliminary inventory and a preliminary preservation assessment. And then finally, gather any resources that you may have received from the donor. And this can be really helpful. These may include physical and digital inventories. They may include office management manuals that the office used to onboard new staff. It could include staff lists or even receipts from the National Record Center. And this is something that John mentioned. If members have been serving for a long time, they may have run out of physical storage space in their offices. and have transferred files to the National Records Center. And those transfers will have been documented by receipts that will have helpful information for you as the archivist. And I think these documents from the donor can really help you get a composite sense of how the office organized their files, and how they thought about the roles and functions that they performed. I think these documents can help to reveal the original order of a collection, and I think they are a pretty good indicator as to what series that you'll be arranging the collection into. So I want to share some specific examples here. So what you're seeing on the left is a receipt from the National Records Center confirming that they received 7 boxes from the office of Senator Daniel K. Inouye in 1971. And from these descriptions, I hope it's not too small to see, we can infer that the office maintained a series of legislative files that they arranged alphabetically. We can see that they kept a series of public relations files. We can see that they maintained documentation of the senator's own bills separately from the rest of the legislative files, and that they organized the senator's own bills by bill number. And in this way, you can kind of see an arrangement of the collection starting to emerge right there. What you're seeing on the right is a page from the Inouye office's winter 2001 internal staff directory. And we have these for like almost 50 years. And I especially like the 1990s and 2000s ones because of the clip art and because of the fact that they look kind of like zines. And so these, on this particular page, what you're seeing is a list of the different legislative policy areas that the office dealt with. And on this list are identified which legislative assistants in the DC and district offices were the point people on these particular issues. So if the congressional collection is to have a subject file series, which you often see in congressional collections, these legislative policy areas will generally map to the subjects that you're going to see. Often you will receive the files of individual staff members as part of the overall collection. And a staff list like this can tell you which areas staff members covered. And this information can be helpful for a scope and content note on a staff file series. Okay, so you have gathered and become familiar with the collection's kind of key documentation. I think another really helpful thing to do before jumping into processing, and John alluded to this a little bit too, is to become familiar with how Congress and congressional offices work. Remember that congressional papers collections represent the work of the entire office. I like to tell researchers that it's kind of like congressional collections are kind of like if you took the filing cabinets and the network servers from the office and moved them to the archives. That's what you have in the congressional collection. So the more that you understand about what offices do, how they work, what the different job descriptions are, the easier it will be to discern the office's filing scheme and therefore to kind of figure out how to arrange the collection. So these are stills from a video put together by Hawaii's Congressman Ed Case. He has one that's, this is the day in my life in DC. He has another one that's documents a day in his life in his district. The camera person just kind of follows him around throughout his day. Videos like this, which I think other members create as well, can really help us to see all of the activities outside just like giving speeches on the floor that members and member offices do. And they can really help us to kind of picture the context and the environment in which these records are being created. So I actually have all of my students watch these videos as part of their onboarding. In addition, here are some helpful sources for understanding Congress and congressional offices. And these, I think, are going to be shared in the chat and maybe emailed to you afterwards. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. But again, the reason that I'm kind of taking so long talking about all of this prep work is because I think it will really pay off when it comes time for arrangement and description, particularly in cases where there's little original order evident in the collection. And to be honest, this is prep work that I wish that I had done myself before jumping into processing my first congressional collection. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about common series in congressional collections. In general, these series kind of map to the functions and roles within congressional offices. Whether or not original order is discernible in the papers that you receive, these are some of the general series that congressional collections tend to fall into. So if you look at John's finding aids, if you look at Kate's finding aids, if you look at our university's finding aids, you will probably see a lot of these series present across all of those collections. For reasons of time, I'm not going to linger too long here, but I will share these slides with you folks so you'll be able to have all of this information. Okay. And now what I want to do, rather than kind of doing a kind of generic step-by-step of arrangement and description, I wanted to spend some time using two case studies from our collection to illustrate two different approaches to processing congressional collections. The amount of resources and staffing available for these two collections was really different, and the timelines for processing were also really different. And therefore, the degree to which the papers were arranged, described, and preserved was really different across these two collections. But I want to emphasize that both of these approaches are okay. And in fact, both of these collections are just as easy to use. And these are the two most frequently requested collections among our library's congressional collection. First is the Fong papers, which were received in 1998, which was about 20 years after Fong retired from the Senate. This was a collection of 660 linear feet that had been in storage before those 20 years. So by the time it came to the library, there was very little original order. The donor wanted to see the collection opened as soon as possible. This is a collection that came with a $10,000 gift that was to be used for fumigation, inventory, and relocation. And I want to make a quick point about this, like kind of resources focus area. I want to be careful not to imply that I want to be careful to state that this is kind of supplemental funding that was either received or secured for these two collections. And it represents kind of resources that are over and above the resources that the library was already committing to preserving and maintaining the collections long term. So I want to be careful not to suggest that this $10,000, $300,000, that this in any way represents the total cost of stewardship or even the total cost of processing, because there are a lot of other expenses over and above these amounts. And in fact, there are collections, congressional collections that come in with no funding that, the library will process to the folder level. So I think in the cases of these two particular case studies, I think the kind of most salient factor determining the level of processing that these collections received was actually how soon the collection was going to be opened. So in the case of the Fong papers, this collection was processed in 7 months by 2 full-time archivists and a student. It received box level arrangement and description. Everything was reboxed, but there was very limited refoldering. On the right side of the slide, we can see the Inoue papers, which was a much bigger collection, 1,200 linear feet, with 2 terabytes of data. For this collection, it came There was a box level inventory present for most of it. The donors wanted to see it opened after processing, with sensitive series restricted for 15 years after the date of donation. For this collection, the library administration was able to secure $300,000 in non-donor funds that was to be used for funding 2 archives technicians, supplies, and digitization. This collection was processed in 3 years by 1 full-time archivist and 2 full-time techs. And this is a collection that received folder level arrangement and description and was completely refoldered and reboxed. So again, these are 2 very different collections, and where archivists took very different approaches to arrangement and description. But again, I think both of them are just as easy to use. And in fact, both are our most requested collections. Okay. And finally, I just wanted to share some really quick takeaways. My recommendation is to really invest the time in understanding Congress and congressional offices before attempting arrangement. I think it makes it a lot easier to identify the series that you're going to be arranging the collection into. And I really feel like being able to see these kind of big subject areas or big functions of the congressional offices and being able to continually like return your attention to these kind of big picture functions will really help you avoid creating like sub series, which I think in large, very technical collections like this, the kind of pull to create very deeply nested arrangements is very real. Secondly, use MPLP. You can prioritize series for preservation, arrangement, and description based on anticipated use. So that's what happened with the Fong papers in terms of, which series were going to be refoldered. Box level arrangement and description is fine. And in the future, if resources permit, you can always reprocess select series at the folder level or rehouse select series. And in fact, that is what happened with several series within the Fong papers. Just within the past 2 years, we've been able to reprocess some of those. But the kind of desire to do that more granular work did not prevent the collection from being processed and open to researchers 20 years ago. And finally, document everything. Congressional collections are huge. You might change jobs before completing processing. I think the first collection that I processed was worked on by 3 Congressional Papers archivists before it came to me. So that documentation that they had done was very helpful. Document decisions, document locations, and define terms. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop my share and turn it over to Kate.
All right. Okay, all right. Share my screen. No, I don't want that. Okay, there we go. Okay, can everybody see my slides? Can everyone hear me? All right. So I am going to take the last section of the presentation, which, as you can see, we're kind of walking you through a process here. Why should I care about the collection? Okay, now I have it. I've processed it. It's ready for use. What next? How do I, build a user base, and how do I expand my holdings, and promote these collections so that they'll actually get used. So a couple of things about promotion. I think that that there is no one size fits all answer, and I mean this applies not just to congressional archives, but really most all types. Um, you need to know your audience and how they receive information the best. In my community, we're a real small town in rural Northeast Mississippi. There's a lot of people here who still get their news from print newspapers. So we send announcements out, when a new collection is open or we've received a new donation or gotten a new grant. Just any activity that we've done that we think is noteworthy, we send that out. We put announcements about events in the local newspaper, and then of course, social media is going to, look different depending on your institution, what their policies are around that. But it certainly is a wonderful tool for communicating these collections. Another thing that you can do if you are fortunate enough to be at an institution like mine here at Mississippi State, we've got, a dedicated public relations office, and they really are kind of like the university's newspaper, and they're constantly looking for content that makes them look good. And so I will, share with them, even when I've like reprocessed a collection and the finding is just better, that they can help me communicate that out um, on the appropriate channels to get the most viewership. They understand how that works in a way that I don't. And another thing that has been really successful for us at State, you'll find, and of course, any of you who have worked with archives for long enough, you understand that certain types of records attract certain types of researchers, and there's a pretty tight-knit community among them. It's pretty obvious where those networks are. And when you have a patron who you have success with, maybe after time they've done some research with you, they have maybe published their first book, and you have kind of an open line of communication with them. A lot of historians have like huge social media followings, and a lot of times I'll just, send a note to a few of them and say, hey, we've gotten this new collection in. I'm probably going to have it processed in the next year or two. Or, hey, we've just gotten this grant or we're having this event, whatever it is. And they will share it on their own social media, and then it's just off to the races. That's just a really passive way to get, views, right? And then newsletters. We use newsletters a lot here at State. The Frank and Virginia Williams collection of Lincolniana, which we have here at MSU. Some of you guys may be familiar with it. It's a huge, huge Lincoln collection. They have a wonderful quarterly Substack email newsletter that they send out, and it gets a ton of engagement. And a lot of those are free. The free version of Substack, MailChimp, some of these others. You can do a lot with the free versions of those, and I think they can be really effective. But I also think just word of mouth, just go around, talk about it everywhere you can, and that over time, I promise you, it's going to build up a pretty good culture. Another thing that I think works really well for promoting these collections is to try to do some public support for research, incentivize individual research through like fellowships, travel grants, hosting lectures and book signings, things of that nature. Here's a flyer from one that we have started here at MSU with some extra money that we had from the Sonny Montgomery paper. Sonny Montgomery was in Congress from this district that Starkville is in. He's an alum of Mississippi State, so everybody knows him already. They know the name. We were able to pull together enough money to do an annual lecture series and research fellowship. So there's up to $5,000. We'll pay for not only the lecture, but also travel and all other lodging and expenditures here in Starkville. And really, we wanted to do that so that we could have a way to kind of remove the barrier for early career researchers to get here, and also give them an opportunity to provide, a public lecture. There's an educational component to it as well. And so it just ticks a lot of boxes for us and what we're about. And, money is always tight. I know, but if you don't have money, I guarantee you have space. And that in and of itself is a commodity these days. And I think that also can be very effective. So just like offering to host events such as like voting drives and things of that nature that are kind of a part of the civic process. I think that's a really important way to engage people about these collections and what they mean. And another thing that I do is I try to be, you hear it, I'm from Mississippi and I sound like cornbread. I really try to be, as good of a hostess as I know how to be, because that is also a great way to attract, right, that network of historians and researchers and scholars and the people that are going to keep coming back to you and be good cheerleaders for you. Getting to Starkville, again, middle of nowhere. Yeah, I really do. I put on my travel agent hat and I'm like, if you're coming from the north and if you're coming from the west, all that kind of stuff. And they ask for restaurant recommendations, I do that. And I think that is another really great way to build goodwill. Archival instruction is one of the best ways that I get these collections out to our faculty here on campus and to our students. It's helped me a lot in recent years to sort of bill it as experiential learning, because it's not just about the content of the documents, it's also about teaching them how to perform research in an archive. You can use congressional collections just in the same way that you do others to do this. And when you explain to them that, and I've listed out here, these are just some of the disciplines that I have interacted with and done archival instruction for. And when you talk to the faculty and you tell them, hey, archival research is a skill that all these different types of jobs use. And when you frame it up that way as more of a like workforce development skill on top of just, education, personal edification, all those things, they really respond well to that. And you'll be surprised at the amount of engagement you'll get from that. And every time I have an instruction section, even if I know it's a one shot, I add it to what I call my Rolodex. It's not a real Rolodex. It's just an email list that I keep. And every beginning of every fall semester, the beginning of every spring semester, I reach out to our faculty here on campus, the ones that I've worked with in the past, and just say, hey, still here, happy to help you. If there's anything I can do to help you with your instruction this semester, please just let me know. You would be amazed at how much engagement I just get from that. Exhibits, another great way to get these collections seen. I change them a lot. That's always my biggest tip, really, to any archive. Every 6 months, every 9 months, I think is a pretty good schedule for these, just like any other. And just for some inspiration, anniversaries for building exhibits out of congressional collections in particular, anniversaries of things like wars, natural disasters, key legislation that they were a part of or even just there for. I guarantee if they didn't have, a real like active role in writing the legislation or things of that nature, they're going to have something on it in their collections. Most things are going to hit their desk at some point. And even just 1 or 2 items in a small exhibit case can have a lot of impact. Biographies, biographical kind of exhibits are always a slam dunk. The presidencies, one of the collections that we have, the biggest congressional collection that we have are the papers of Senator John Stennis. He was a segregationist Southern senator from the mid 20th century. He was in Congress from 1947 to 1989. So he was there for 8 presidents. And so a lot of times I'll just make exhibits about, his relationship to Reagan, right? A Democrat to a Republican, and kind of couch Stennis in that relationship. Or another one, just sort of, I did one on Jimmy Carter after Jimmy Carter passed away, things of that nature. And then pop culture. I've got one here that I saw Oppenheimer and I just loved it. And I thought, man, I bet we've got something from that Lewis Strauss guy in Stennis. And sure enough, we did. And I made an exhibit about it because in Mississippi, we actually had a couple of nuclear testing sites, the salt domes, and that was a really big issue in the 60s in particular. Um, some ideas for events. So there's one initiative that the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress does. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in my next slide, but it's called Congress Week. And every April, they just encourage repositories with congressional collections to, whether it's a public lecture or an exhibit, or even just like a digital exhibit, they encourage you to, kind of promote your collections during that week. And they will actually help you cross promote it with the social media page. There's a website. Constitution Day on September 17th is always a really good opportunity to just talk about Congress, the function of Congress. One-shot events such as, book signings, lectures, collection openings. The photo that I have here on this slide is from a couple of years ago, and this is actually when we opened 2 collections, a father and a son. The son was a congressman from Mississippi for about 12 years in the 90s and early aughts, and his father was a federal judge. Charles Pickering was the judge. He also ran for the Senate. And then his son, Chip Pickering. And that was our first father-son duo. So we had a room full, we had a panel, and they just sort of shared, their memories and their hopes for what people would find in their collections. It was a really, really special day. I have hosted voting drives. I really try to use these collections to, promote civic engagement. I have a voting drive planned every couple of years. Last year, I think we took about 200, maybe a little bit more actual applications up to the courthouse. But we had over 400 people interact with us at the desk just to get information about, it's a university, right? We've got so many out-of-state students, and they might come out, well, how do I do absentee in Georgia? And, just helping connect them with that information. That's what a library is supposed to do. And that got a lot of really good response. We also have a lot of success with like watch parties. Debates can be a good opportunity for this. The new documentaries and films, we contributed to that really unhinged documentary on Netflix called Kings of Tupelo, if you've not watched it. It's wild. I love it, though. I'm so proud that I was able to contribute something to that. It's just the most Mississippi Gothic Southern story ever. And we did a little watch party for that last year. The workshops, such as leadership trainings, community organizing, if that is, a reality where you are, you can be a really good host for that. So those are just some ideas for public events that you could do. And then, of course, digitization is another sort of passive way to promote the collections. And you want to think of it as like a highlight reel. You will never be able to digitize all of these collections, and you should absolutely never, ever promise to do that. You really want to manage people's expectations. And I mean, again, this is true in a congressional collection, but it's true in most others as well. It's ideally we would be able to digitize every stitch of everything, but the reality is also the reality. So I think when you think of it as as a highlight reel and, maybe pick some selections from parts of the collection that end up getting you can kind of keep up usage stats, however your institution does that, to make those decisions. For example, and I've put a photo here, we have digitized a collection of Sonny Montgomery's World War II correspondence. He's a combat veteran of World War II. He was in Europe, and we had about just like two, cubic foot boxes of that correspondence. And that was a, manageable amount of, and sort of a complete story that you could tell. And that is kind of the way that I approach digitization, sort of selected stories, time frames, things of that nature, just to get people interested. Grant funding is another really good way. To get some attention on the collection, also just get some stuff done. These are a couple of the organizations that have been, good for us in the past. There's a lot of influx in the federal government right now. I still recommend, grants.gov, just to kind of see what's out there right now as possibilities in terms of federal grants. But there's a lot of state and local grants that you can use to do some smaller digitization and preservation work. We have really liked the Grammy Foundation in the past. They do a $20,000 audio preservation grant. There's a lot of audiovisual in congressional collections, and they can be a big help to you. Clear is another really good one. Their hidden collections grant is great. And then they have another one called Recordings at Risk, if you end up with a collection that has a lot of legacy audiovisual. And they're also a great way to promote the collections, because, most grants, require there's got to be a promotional plan to it. And so I think that that's a good way to sort of force the issue. And then AI, we're not going to get through any presentation without talking about AI, but I do think that it is extra important to take, generative AI in particular into consideration when you're making decisions about what to digitize. And that's going to look different, I think, from institution to institution. And then as far as professional development, these two organizations have absolutely been just lifesavers for me as a relatively new on the scene professional. John and Dawn have been wonderful mentors to me through both of these groups. The Society of American Archivists Congressional Paper Section, it's got about 150 members. It has, you get all of the benefits of being a member of SAA. I believe you have an unlimited number of sections that you can join for more kind of tailored and targeted information. And it's got, all the trappings, the message board and all of those things that can really help you promote, and a lot of people will put out on message, oh, hey, this travel grant is open, promote that from your repository, or hey, we've got a brand new collection open, this finding aid is done, and we just sort of sharing that with each other is also a great way to sort of spread it through the network of people who use these collections. And then the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress is the other organization that a lot of us are involved in. And this one, you've got the opportunity to join at the institutional level. MSU is an institutional member. There are several others. You can also join it individually. One of the things that I have really loved about ACSC is that it has provided so many opportunities for collaboration. We have a wonderful annual meeting every year. We alternate years. One year it'll be at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and that provides members of the group opportunity to also visit Capitol Hill and connect with donors there, while also doing some professional development with their peers. And then also there's been several collaborative efforts through the years, but one of the really big ones right now that ACSC is very, very proud of is the American Congress Digital Archives portal, and this was sort of spearheaded. John and Don can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. I think it was spearheaded out of West Virginia University, and I know that I believe Don in Hawaii is contributing to the project. Several other institutions, I believe the University of Georgia, the Dole Institute at Kansas is contributing to it, and they are looking to grow. So that too is another kind of part of the infrastructure that can help you get this out there. And that is all for me. So I guess we'll head into the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all three of our presenters. I am going